The night my mother looked at me across our dining room table and said I was too stupid for college. I was 22 years old, holding a brochure I had hidden in my room for 3 weeks, like it was something shameful. She expected me to cry. She expected me to shrink. She expected one cruel sentence to do what years of mockery had almost done already, make me give up before I ever tried. Years later, that same woman would sit in an auditorium and hear the dean call my name for the highest academic award in the entire program. But that night, I was still the daughter she thought she had trained to doubt herself. My name is Lena Whitmore, and for most of my life, my mother spoke about me as if I were the disappointment she had been forced to tolerate. Not the wild child, not the dramatic one, not even the openly rebellious one. That would have been easier, in some twisted way. No, I was the quiet one, the girl who cleaned up after dinner without being asked, the girl who double-checked instructions, arrived early, stayed late, and still somehow got treated like she was slow because she was careful. In my family, intelligence was never measured fairly. It was assigned. My younger brother, Caleb, was brilliant because he was loud, confident, and knew how to speak before he thought. He could guess half an answer and say it with enough swagger that people called him sharp. I could bring home a near-perfect report card, and my mother would look at one missed question like it confirmed everything she already believed about me. She works hard because she has to. She used to tell relatives with a little shrug, like I was some disappointing appliance that needed extra effort to function. Caleb doesn't even have to try. That was her favorite kind of cruelty, the kind wrapped in casual certainty, delivered so often it started sounding like family truth. By the time I finished high school, I had learned how to make myself small around my own ambitions. I still had them. I just stopped saying them out loud. It was easier that way, less humiliating. I worked part-time at a grocery store, saved what little I could, and pretended I was figuring things out, while secretly reading college websites at night, scrolling through program pages with my bedroom door locked and my volume off. I loved learning in a way I never knew how to explain to people like my mother, not because I was flashy, not because I wanted applause, because something in me came alive when things finally made sense. I liked structure, patterns, long nights with notes spread out around me. I liked earning understanding piece by piece, but in my mother's world, intelligence only counted if it looked effortless. Since mine did not, she dismissed it before it had the chance to become anything. The night everything broke open was a Sunday in early spring. My mother had made roast chicken. Caleb was talking too loudly about some half-finished business idea he would abandon within a month. My Aunt Renee was there, along with her husband, and the whole table had that fake, comfortable family energy that only exists when no one has challenged the hierarchy yet. I do not know what made me do it then. Maybe I was tired of hiding. Maybe I was tired of feeling ashamed of wanting more. Maybe some small, stubborn part of me still believed that if I said it gently enough, if I presented it the right way, my mother might surprise me. So I waited until there was a pause in conversation, folded my napkin in my lap to stop my hands from shaking, and said, "I've been looking at a university transfer program. I want to apply." For 1 second, the room was quiet. Then Caleb let out a short laugh, like he thought I was joking. My mother turned toward me slowly. "A what?" "A transfer program," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to go back to school seriously. I've been researching." She actually smiled, not warmly, not proudly. The kind of smile people wear when they are about to enjoy someone else's embarrassment. "Lena," she said, and even now I can still hear the condescension in her voice so clearly it makes my stomach tighten. "You are too stupid for college." No one spoke. I felt every bit of heat leave my face. My aunt gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. The kind people use when they know something awful has just been said, but do not want to be the one to challenge it. Caleb smirked into his drink. My uncle stared hard at his plate, and my mother, seeing that no one was stopping her, kept going. "Let's be realistic for once," she said. "School like that is for people who can handle it. You struggle with basic decisions. You overthink everything. You'd waste the money, get overwhelmed, and quit." I remember gripping the edge of my chair so hard my fingers hurt. I remember looking around that table, waiting for someone, anyone, to say she was wrong. No one did. And that was the moment something changed in me. Not loudly, not dramatically. I did not stand up and make a speech. I did not throw my napkin down and storm out. That would have given her too much satisfaction. Instead, I sat there in silence and let the humiliation settle all the way into my bones. Then I made myself one promise. I would never beg that room to see me clearly again. If I was going to build a life, I would build it somewhere my mother's voice did not get to be the final authority. Because the truth was, she had not just insulted me, she had revealed exactly how badly she needed me to believe her. I did not cry at the table. That was the part my mother probably found most unsatisfying. She wanted visible damage. She wanted tears. Retreat. Maybe even an argument she could twist later into proof that I was too emotional to handle real life. But I gave her nothing. I finished dinner in near silence, carried my plate to the sink, thanked my aunt for coming, and went upstairs with my face calm and my chest burning so badly it felt like I had swallowed something hot. Then I locked my bedroom door and finally let myself fall apart. I sat on the floor beside my bed with that college brochure in my lap and cried so hard I could barely breathe. Not just because of what she had said, but because some part of me had still hoped, ridiculously, painfully hoped, that this time she might choose encouragement over humiliation. That maybe if I sounded serious enough, adult enough, she would hear ambition instead of inconvenience. She hadn't. She heard an opening. And like always, she struck exactly where she knew I was still trying to heal. Too stupid for college. The sentence stayed in my head for weeks. It followed me while I stocked shelves at the grocery store. It sat beside me on the bus ride home. It slipped into my thoughts late at night when I opened university websites and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Every application requirement suddenly looked heavier. Every course description felt like a trap. Every success story I read about students transferring and thriving seemed to belong to some species of person I was not allowed to become. That was the worst thing about growing up with someone like my mother. Even when she was not in the room, she knew how to keep speaking through you. Still, I applied. Not dramatically, not with confidence. I applied quietly, almost secretly, like someone committing a crime. I started by enrolling in extra community college classes to strengthen my transfer record. Then I picked up additional shifts at the store because application fees, textbooks, parking, bus passes, and tuition deposits all added up faster than hope ever does. My life became brutally simple. Wake up, go to work, go to class, study, sleep, repeat. It was not glamorous. No one would have looked at me then and thought, "There goes a future top graduate." I was tired all the time. I wore the same few sweaters on rotation because I did not have energy to care. I ate too many vending machine dinners between class and late shifts. Some nights I fell asleep with highlighters still in my hand, cheek pressed against open notes. But I kept going, because once the shame settled, something else took its place: stubbornness. If my mother had laughed and said I would struggle, maybe I could have recovered from that. But she had said it with such finality, such confidence, like my future had already been measured and dismissed, and there was something in me, small, bruised, but still alive, that could not bear the thought of letting her be right without forcing life itself to prove it. The first semester was brutal, not because the classes were impossible, but because I was so scared of failing that every assignment felt loaded with more meaning than it should have carried. A B+ on a paper could ruin my whole week. One difficult exam question could send me into a silent spiral. Other students seemed relaxed in ways I could not understand. They complained about workloads, laughed after quizzes, shrugged off bad days. I treated every grade like testimony. I was not just taking classes, I was trying to outrun a sentence. At home, my mother kept up her usual routine of casual contempt. "How are your little classes going?" she asked one evening while I was microwaving leftovers after work. I kept my eyes on the timer. "Fine." "Fine" usually means not well. I said nothing. She leaned against the counter, watching me with that familiar expression, half boredom, half enjoyment. "You know, there's no shame in being realistic. Some people just aren't academic. It's better to accept that early than waste years pretending." I still remember the smell of reheated pasta and dish soap in that kitchen, the hum of the microwave, the fluorescent light making everything look flatter and colder than it was. I remember that because I stood there listening to her and realized something important. She was not trying to protect me from disappointment. She was trying to keep me attached to it. If I failed on my own, she could call herself right. But if I succeeded, then all the years she had spent treating me like the lesser child would be exposed for what they were: lazy, cruel, and intentional. So I stopped sharing anything with her. No exam scores, no acceptance updates, no praise from instructors, no nothing. At first it felt lonely, but after a while it felt powerful. I had spent so long handing my family pieces of my hope, only to watch them turn those pieces into jokes. Keeping my progress private became a form of protection. My work no longer had to survive their opinions to matter. And slowly, outside that house, my life began to change. A professor named Dr. Elaine Mercer noticed me first. She taught one of the hardest classes in the department, and most students found her intimidating. She was sharp, direct, and had no patience for laziness disguised as confusion. I admired her immediately, not because she was warm. She wasn't, exactly, but because she was fair. In a world shaped by my mother's distortions, fairness felt almost holy. One evening after class, I stayed behind to ask a question about a research assignment. I had rewritten my draft twice already and still felt like I was missing something. Dr. Mercer listened, asked me 3 pointed questions, then looked down at my outline. "This is stronger than you think," she said. I honestly did not know how to respond. She glanced up. "Why do you look surprised?" I laughed nervously. "I don't know. I just thought maybe I was overcomplicating it." "You're not overcomplicating it," she said. "You're thinking deeply. Those are not the same thing." That sentence did something to me I cannot fully explain, because my whole life, careful had been translated as weak. Thoughtful had been translated as slow. Needing time had been translated as lack. And here was someone with real authority. Someone whose opinion was earned and not weaponized. Looking at the exact trait my mother mocked and naming it as strength. I carried that moment for months. Not because it magically healed me. It didn't. But it cracked open a possibility I had never really been allowed to trust. That maybe I had not been failing my mother's definition of intelligence. Maybe her definition had just been small, shallow, and convenient. By the end of that year, my grades were excellent. Not effortless, never effortless. I had earned every decimal point with caffeine, discipline, and a level of private panic no one around me fully saw. But they were excellent. Strong enough that advisors started speaking to me differently. Strong enough that transfer counselors started asking where I planned to apply. Strong enough that one afternoon, sitting in a cramped office with a woman reviewing my academic file, I heard words I had never once heard at home. "You're very competitive," she said. I blinked. For transfer? She smiled. For more than that. I walked out of that office and sat on a bench outside with my bag in my lap and tears pressing behind my eyes. I did not let them fall. I just sat there in the cold, breathing slowly, trying to absorb the fact that somewhere beyond my mother's voice, I was becoming visible. The transfer acceptance came on a rainy Thursday. I had just gotten home from work, shoes still wet. When I opened my email and saw the subject line, for a full 10 seconds, I could not click it. My hands were shaking too hard. When I finally did, I read the first sentence 3 times before it felt real. I had been accepted into the program. Not barely, not conditionally, accepted. I covered my mouth with one hand and sat down on the edge of my bed because my knees suddenly felt too weak to hold me up. The room looked the same as it had that morning. Same chipped dresser, same pale walls, same narrow window over the radiator. But I was not the same girl who had woken up there. For one quiet, impossible moment, I let myself feel proud. Then I heard my mother downstairs calling my name. The feeling vanished almost instantly, replaced by instinct. Hide it. Protect it. Don't hand it to her yet. So I printed the letter the next day at school and kept it folded in a notebook for nearly a week before saying anything at home. And when I finally told her, her reaction was exactly what I should have expected. Well, she said, not looking up for long from her coffee. Getting in is one thing, finishing is another. That was all. No congratulations, no pride, no surprise that maybe she had been wrong. Just a new line moved farther down the field. A new version of the same refusal. And that was when I fully understood something I should have learned earlier. There was no achievement that would force my mother to become generous. If I wanted encouragement, I would have to stop expecting it from the woman most invested in my limits. So I moved forward without her. I transferred into the program and worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. My schedule became almost punishing. Classes, reading, research, part-time work, tutoring hours, library nights, group projects, presentations, internship applications, while other students posted spring break photos and complained about being busy. I was budgeting down to the dollar and timing my meals between obligations. I was not coasting toward a degree. I was clawing my way into a life that had been denied to me long before I understood I was allowed to want it. And somehow, against everything she had predicted, I did not break. I got stronger. Professors began remembering my name. My papers were used as examples. I was invited to assist on a faculty project. Then came departmental recognition. Then a scholarship. Then an academic distinction I had not even known existed until an advisor pulled me aside after class and said, with a warmth I still remember clearly, "Lena, you are one of the strongest students in this department." For a second, I could not speak, because somewhere deep inside me, the girl at the dinner table still flinched when authority looked her way. She still expected ridicule before praise. She still waited for the sentence that would put her back in the place my mother had chosen for her. But it never came. Only this. "You have real discipline," my advisor said. "And more than that, you have depth. Don't underestimate how far that can take you." I nodded, thanked her, walked all the way to the parking lot, got into my car, and cried with my forehead against the steering wheel. Not because I was weak, because I had spent so many years starving for words like that. I barely knew how to survive hearing them. And that was how I built myself. Quietly, exhaustedly, almost secretly. Not in the rooms where my mother laughed, but in classrooms, libraries, office hours, and late-night study sessions where no one needed me to stay small to feel comfortable. By then, my success was no longer theoretical. It was happening, even if my family still could not, or would not, see it. And the cruelest part was, they still thought I was the joke. By the time I was deep into the program, My life had split cleanly in two. At school, I was becoming someone I barely knew how to recognize. Professors greeted me by name. Advisors asked about my plans after graduation as if graduate school. Fellowships and competitive opportunities were not ridiculous fantasies, but realistic next steps. I had classmates who respected me, instructors who pushed me because they believed I could handle more, and a growing record of work that made me feel, for the first time in my life, like my mind was not something I had to apologize for. At home, I was still Lena, the one my mother spoke over, the one my brother laughed at, the one whose achievements only mattered if they could be reduced, dismissed, or turned into some smaller thing that did not threaten the family story. That split did more damage than I expected. People think success automatically heals humiliation, but it does not. Sometimes it just makes the contrast sharper. Sometimes it leaves you walking out of rooms where you are respected, straight into rooms where you are still being treated like the version of yourself someone else invented years ago. My brother Caleb made that contrast impossible to ignore. He was 24 by then, all confidence and unfinished plans. He talked about big opportunities the way some people talk about weather, constantly, dramatically, and with very little control over reality. He had started one business idea, abandoned 2 certification programs, quit a sales job after telling everyone management was intimidated by him, and still somehow managed to be described by my mother as the naturally gifted one. That phrase alone used to make me feel like I was choking. Naturally gifted. As if discipline counted less than performance. As if effort was evidence of inadequacy instead of commitment. As if the daughter who kept showing up and doing the work was somehow less impressive than the son who kept fumbling every chance he was given, but did it with enough swagger to look promising. At one family dinner that fall, my Aunt Renee asked how school was going. Before I could answer, my mother gave a little laugh and said, "She's busy pretending to be an academic." The table laughed politely, not because it was funny, because families like mine train people to laugh at cruelty, so no one has to call it cruelty. I set down my fork and looked at my plate for one extra second before answering. "I'm doing well." My mother took a sip of wine. "Define well." "Good grades, strong evaluations, a faculty research project." She raised her eyebrows in that exaggerated way she had when she wanted to make confidence look embarrassing. "Well, listen to that." Caleb smirked. "Did they finally trust you with the copy machine?" My aunt laughed too loudly. My uncle looked down. I felt the old heat rise in my face, that familiar mix of shame and fury that used to leave me speechless. But by then I had spent too much time in rooms where I was taken seriously to fully collapse under theirs anymore. So I looked at Caleb and said, very calmly, "No, they trusted me with data analysis." The silence after that was brief, but satisfying. He rolled his eyes. My mother changed the subject, but I noticed something small that night. My aunt looked at me differently for a second. Not warmly, exactly. More like she was trying to figure out whether the family version of me was lagging behind the real one. That was the thing about progress. Once it became undeniable in one area, the old lies started fitting less cleanly. Still, my family kept trying. Every accomplishment was minimized. When I got a scholarship, my mother called it nice little school money. When I was invited to present work at a student conference, she said, "That sounds stressful. Are you sure you won't freeze?" When I made Dean's List again, she said, "Well, maybe the program just isn't that competitive." There was no winning with her because winning was the one thing she could not afford to let me do without resistance. If I succeeded openly, then years of calling me slow, unrealistic, and incapable would not just look mistaken, they would look malicious. So I learned to protect my milestones. I stopped bringing home certificates. I stopped mentioning awards. I stopped telling relatives details unless they asked directly. Not because I was ashamed anymore, but because I was tired of watching meaningful moments get handled with dirty hands. By then, I had mentors who saw more in me than I was comfortable admitting out loud. Dr. Mercer in particular had become a steady force in my life. She was not sentimental, which made what she did say matter even more. One afternoon, after reviewing a capstone draft with me, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment. "You know you're one of the top students in this cohort, right?" she said. I actually laughed a little, mostly out of disbelief. "I know I work hard." "That's not what I asked." I looked down at my notes. My instinct was still to shrink from praise, to convert it into effort, to make it about endurance instead of ability. It felt safer that way. Ability had always been the dangerous thing in my family. If I claimed too much of it, someone would come for me. Dr. Mercer seemed to read that hesitation off my face. "Lena," she said, more softly than usual, "you are not just hardworking. You are excellent. Learn the difference." That sentence stayed with me. So did the one that came a few months later. I was leaving an advising appointment when the program coordinator asked whether I had a minute. I assumed it was something administrative, a missing form, a graduation requirement, some minor issue I could fix quickly before work. Instead, she closed the office door and smiled. "There's an internal review happening for end-of-program honors," she said. "I can't make promises, and I'm telling you this because you'll hear about the process soon anyway, but your name is being discussed very seriously." I stared at her. "For honors?" I asked. She smiled a little wider. "For more than that?" I felt my heartbeat in my throat. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that people at this institution have noticed what you've done." I nodded like I was composed, thanked her, walked out of the building, then sat alone on a bench near the library with my hands wrapped so tightly around my bag strap that my fingers ached. Because even then, even after all the grades, all the praise, all the proof, some part of me still expected success to vanish the second I reached for it too openly. I did not tell my family. I barely told anyone, actually. Not because I wanted to be mysterious, because I could not bear the idea of offering them something that could still be mocked before it became real. I knew how my mother would handle it if she heard too early. "Oh, so now you think you're winning prizes? Let's not embarrass ourselves before anything happens. People get nominated for all kinds of things." She had a way of shrinking the air around hope until you felt childish for breathing it. So I kept quiet and kept working. Graduation approached faster than I was ready for. My classmates talked about dresses, reservations, job offers, family travel plans. I nodded along and tried to match their excitement. But privately, I felt something more complicated. Pride. Yes. Relief. Definitely. But also dread. Because graduation meant my family would finally have to sit in a room and watch the outcome of years they had spent underestimating. And I did not know whether that would feel healing or just expose a new layer of pain. When my mother announced she would attend, she made it sound like a burden she was nobly accepting. "Well, obviously we should go," she said on the phone. "It's still an important day, even if undergraduate ceremonies are mostly symbolic." I almost laughed. Mostly symbolic. That was how she talked about anything she had failed to control. Caleb said he might come if nothing better comes up. Which was so perfectly him, I barely reacted. My Aunt Renee, suddenly more interested now that I was close to finishing something tangible, asked what color my honors cord would be. My mother answered for me before I could speak. "Let's not act like she's valedictorian," she said. The irony of that sentence almost made my head spin. I stood there in my apartment with the phone against my ear, listening to her reduce something she did not even understand, and I felt a very strange calm settle over me. Because for the first time, I knew something she didn't. Not the final result yet, not officially, but enough. Enough to understand that the story she kept telling about me was about to run into a wall built from facts, faculty votes, and public recognition she could neither interrupt nor explain away. She still thought I was walking toward an ordinary graduation. She still thought the day would end with a few polite claps, a family photo, and maybe a dismissive little comment over lunch about how, at least you finished. She had no idea what was waiting for her in that auditorium, and I did not correct her. I let her believe it, because after years of being laughed at before I had proof, I had learned the value of silence. Silence protects fragile things while they are becoming real. Silence denies cruel people the chance to bruise a moment before it blooms. So I said very little. I picked up my cap and gown. I confirmed my seat assignment. I answered faculty emails. I smiled through family phone calls. And all the while, somewhere underneath the nerves and exhaustion and private hope, one truth kept pulsing quietly through me. At school, they already knew who I was becoming. At home, they were still laughing at a version of me that was about to disappear in public. By the week of graduation, I had still told almost no one what might happen, but I could feel it coming, and for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of being seen. I was afraid of what seeing the truth would do to the people who had spent years pretending I had none. The morning of my graduation, I woke up before my alarm and lay still in the dark with my heart already racing. For a few seconds, I did not move. I just stared at the ceiling of my apartment and listened to the quiet hum of the air conditioner, trying to slow the rush of thoughts in my chest. Graduation, the ceremony, the stage, my family in the audience, the possibility I had carried in silence for weeks, now pressing against the edges of the day, like a secret too large to hide much longer. I sat up slowly and looked at my cap and gown hanging from the closet door. Even then, it did not feel fully real, not because I had not earned it. I had. Every page of notes, every late shift, every breakdown in library bathrooms, every paper drafted and redrafted until sunrise, every hungry month. Every moment I kept going while hearing my mother's voice in my head telling me I was too stupid for college. I had earned that gown more than almost anything else in my life. But when you spend years being told you are the wrong kind of person for success, achievement can feel surreal, even when it is literally hanging in front of you. I got dressed carefully, almost ritualistically. Not because I had expensive things to wear, I didn't, but because I wanted to be deliberate. I wanted to remember each piece of the morning, the soft cream blouse under the gown, the careful hands I used to pin my hair, the way my fingers trembled a little while fastening my earrings. The honors cords laid across the bed like visible proof that my work had weight. When I picked them up, I paused. There was a time when something like that would have made me want to call home, to say, "Look, do you see this? Do you finally understand what I've done?" That impulse was gone now, not because it had never mattered, because I had finally learned it mattered too much to place in the hands of people who only knew how to bruise it. The campus was already buzzing when I arrived. Families moved in clusters across the walkways carrying flowers, cameras, garment bags, coffee cups, tissues. Some students looked radiant and calm. Others looked like they were trying not to throw up. Professors in regalia crossed the lawn in groups, their voices carrying lightly in the morning air. Everything felt bright, formal, and slightly unreal, like the whole university had stepped into a version of itself made only for endings and beginnings. A few classmates waved when they saw me. "Lena!" one of them called, hurrying over with her gown half unzipped and her cap crooked. "You look amazing." I smiled, hugged her, said thank you, and tried to act normal. Normal was impossible. I checked in, found my place in the lineup, and answered a few texts from friends. Then my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "We're here. Parking is awful. No congratulations. No, we're proud of you. Just irritation wrapped in logistics." I stared at the screen for a second, then locked it without answering. A few minutes later, I saw them. my mother in a pale blue dress, scanning the crowd with the same expression she wore at weddings and funerals, composed, critical, prepared to judge everything from the flowers to the seating. Caleb beside her in a wrinkled button-down he had clearly not ironed, my Aunt Renee behind them, already holding her phone up as if documenting attendance alone counted as support. For a second, seeing them there did something painful and automatic inside me. It pulled on some old thread, some younger part of me that still wanted this day to become the day they finally looked at me and felt uncomplicated pride. Then my mother got close enough to speak. "Well," she said, glancing over my cords and gown, "you clean up nicely." It was such a perfect example of her that I almost laughed. "Not you did it. Not you look beautiful. Not I know how hard you worked." Just a polished little comment floating above the actual moment, careful not to touch anything sincere. Caleb smirked. "Don't trip on stage. That would definitely be your brand." My aunt gave him a light swat on the arm and told him to behave, but she was smiling. I stood there for one beat too long before saying, "Nice to see you too." My mother adjusted the strap of her purse. "Don't be sensitive. We're here, aren't we?" And there it was again. The family standard. Presents counted as generosity even when kindness was nowhere in sight. They could mock, diminish, and needle all they wanted. But as long as they showed up physically, I was supposed to treat it like love. I did not argue. I did not have the energy, and more importantly, I did not want their voices sitting inside me any longer than necessary on a day I had paid for in too many invisible ways. So I nodded once and said, "The ceremony's about to start. I need to go in." My mother gave a little sigh like everything about me remained faintly inconvenient. "Just remember, it's a long event. Don't get your hopes up for anything dramatic." I met her eyes then. There are moments when life feels almost too precise, too perfectly arranged to be accidental. Standing there in my cap and gown with her looking at me like I was still the girl at the dinner table reaching too far above herself. I felt one of those moments settle over me, because she had no idea. No idea what was waiting inside that auditorium. No idea that the faculty had already made their decision. No idea that the same daughter she had called too stupid for college was about to become the most publicly undeniable person in the room. I walked away before I could say something I would not be able to take back. Inside the graduate staging area, the air felt warmer, tighter, charged with nerves. Students were adjusting caps, taking quick photos, checking names and rows. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I kept telling myself to breathe, to focus on the basic next step in front of me. Line up, walk in, sit down, listen. Let the ceremony happen. But there was something electric under all of it. A pressure, a possibility. Dr. Mercer passed by in faculty regalia and paused when she saw me. "You made it," she said. I smiled, suddenly emotional. "I did." She looked at me for one long second, then reached out and straightened one of my cords. It was such a small gesture, but I nearly lost composure right there. "You belong here," she said quietly. I swallowed hard and nodded. Those 4 words did more for me than my family would ever understand. Because that was the heart of everything, wasn't it? Not the grades, not even the award that might be coming. Belonging. The right to stand in a place without feeling like an intruder in your own life. The procession began. Music swelled through the hall, formal and familiar. The line started moving, slow and steady, one by one. We walked into the auditorium beneath bright lights and rising applause. The room looked enormous from the floor, packed with families and faculty and flowers and cameras and expectation. I found my seat among the graduates and sat down as carefully as I could, hands clasped in my lap so no one would see them shaking. Then I looked up toward the audience. It took me a moment, but I found them. My mother sat upright, already scanning the program booklet with mild impatience. Caleb looked bored. My aunt was looking around for me with her phone ready. None of them seemed moved. None of them seemed changed. And something in me went calm. Not cold, not detached. Just clear. Because for years, I had imagined that maybe there would be one perfect moment when they would suddenly become the family I had needed all along. One moment big enough to break through their habits, their hierarchy, their chosen blindness. But sitting there in that sea of black gowns and bright stage lights, I finally understood that the day did not need their transformation to matter. It already mattered. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, welcome remarks, a faculty address, polite laughter in the right places, students shifting nervously, families clapping too early or too long. I listened, but only halfway. My mind kept floating in and out, catching on fragments. Excellence, resilience, achievement, community, words universities love to use on days like that. But to me they sounded different, heavier, more personal. Not abstract values, but things I had dragged myself toward while someone at home kept insisting I would never reach them. Then the dean stepped back to the podium for the academic honors portion of the ceremony. My entire body tensed. I tried to keep my face neutral, tried to breathe normally, tried not to let hope rise too high, because hope had spent too many years getting punished in me. But my heart knew before the rest of me was ready. It beat harder, faster, like it had heard something my mind was still too frightened to trust. The dean smiled out at the audience. Each year, he said, our program recognizes one graduating student whose record of academic excellence, leadership, research quality, and sustained commitment has distinguished them not only among their peers, but across the entire program. I stopped breathing. Around me, the room seemed to sharpen. Every sound got clearer, every light brighter. My hands went cold in my lap. The dean kept speaking. He talked about discipline, depth, extraordinary consistency. A student whose work had impressed faculty across multiple courses and who had demonstrated not only intelligence, but unusual perseverance. And with every sentence, something inside me rose higher and higher, fragile and terrified and almost unbearably alive. Because I knew, before he said my name, before the audience shifted, before the people beside me turned, I knew. This speech was about me. My chest felt tight enough to crack. I looked up toward the audience without meaning to, and in the distance I saw my mother lower the program slowly, her expression changing, not to pride, not yet, but to confusion, then to alertness. Caleb straightened in his seat. My aunt's mouth parted slightly. They were starting to understand. The dean looked down at the card in his hand. Then he said, clearly, into the microphone, this year's award for top graduate in the entire program goes to Lena Whitmore. For 1 second, the whole world seemed to stop. Then the auditorium erupted. Applause crashed over the room so suddenly and so loudly that I physically flinched. People around me turned, smiling, clapping, some reaching toward me as I sat there frozen in my chair with tears already rushing into my eyes. I could hear my name echoing from the stage, hear faculty applauding, hear the students beside me cheering, and underneath all of it, louder than anything, I could hear one sentence from years ago breaking apart inside me. Too stupid for college. My legs felt unsteady when I stood. I do not remember taking the first few steps into the aisle. I remember only pieces. The sound, the lights, the pressure of tears I refused to let fully fall. The way my heart seemed too big for my body. The sensation of walking not just toward a stage, but through every insult that had ever tried to hold me in place. And then, halfway there, I looked into the audience again, and I saw my mother's face, not smiling, not composed, just stunned. as if the entire structure of what she had believed about me had cracked open in public. And she had no idea how to put it back together before everyone else saw it too. By the time I reached the stage, my whole body was trembling. Not weak trembling. Not fear in the way my mother had always accused me of fear, as if caution and sensitivity were defects. This was something bigger than that. It was what happens when years of humiliation meet one undeniable moment of truth. It was shock, relief, grief, vindication. Every version of me I had ever been seemed to be walking beside me at once. The girl at the dinner table clutching a brochure in silence. The student crying in parking lots after faculty praise because she did not know how to hold it. The daughter who kept waiting for one person at home to say, "I was wrong about you." No one had said it, so life had said it for them. The dean smiled as I approached, and I could tell from his expression that this was not some routine administrative gesture to him. He knew what this award meant. Maybe not the family history behind it, not the sentence that had followed me for years, not the private war I had fought just to believe I belonged in rooms like this one, but he knew what academic excellence costs when it is built slowly, honestly, without shortcuts. He handed me the award, shook my hand, and leaned slightly toward the microphone. Lena Whitmore has distinguished herself not only through exceptional academic performance, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, but through intellectual rigor, integrity, and a level of persistence our faculty could not ignore. She represents the very best of this program. The applause rose again. I felt it this time, not just as noise, as impact. It hit my chest, my throat, the back of my eyes. The room blurred for a second, and I had to blink hard to keep the tears from falling. I looked out across the sea of faces, and for one impossible moment I let myself actually absorb what was happening. They were standing, not everyone, not all at once, but enough. Faculty, some students, families of other graduates who did not know me at all, but who were clapping because they had just witnessed something that mattered. And somewhere in that audience was my mother, the woman who had once looked at me like my ambition was embarrassing, now forced to sit there while an entire room honored the mind she had spent years insulting. That moment did not erase the hurt, but it exposed it. There is a difference, because I was not standing on that stage thinking, "Now it's all okay." I was thinking, "So this is what truth looks like when it finally gets a microphone." I smiled for the photo, accepted the plaque with both hands, and walked back to my seat to another wave of applause that felt almost unreal. My classmates reached toward me as I sat down, whispering congratulations, squeezing my arm, grinning like they had expected great things from me all along. One of them actually mouthed, "I knew it." And I laughed through tears because that simple confidence from someone else still felt foreign to me. I glanced toward the audience only once more during the remainder of the ceremony. My Aunt Renee was clapping far too enthusiastically now, the way people do when they are already adjusting their memories to fit a new outcome. Caleb looked like someone had slapped all the air out of him. But my mother had gone still. Not angry, not proud, not emotional in any obvious way, just still. And somehow that was more satisfying than any dramatic reaction could have been, because I recognized that stillness. It was what happened when she could no longer reduce something fast enough to feel in control of it. She could dismiss my dream in a dining room. She could laugh at my classes. She could roll her eyes at scholarships, honors, long nights, and careful effort. But she could not interrupt a dean speaking into a microphone in front of hundreds of people. She could not wave away a public award with her usual little shrug. She could not shrink me quickly enough to protect the version of me she had spent years selling to others. For once, the truth arrived in a room she did not own. After the ceremony ended, the auditorium dissolved into noise and movement. Families surged toward the aisles with flowers, phones, tears, and too many instructions at once. Graduates laughed, hugged, shouted over one another, adjusted caps, looked for loved ones. The whole room felt bright and chaotic and alive. I barely had time to stand before Dr. Mercer reached me. She hugged me once, briefly, firmly, the kind of hug that meant more because she was not a sentimental person, and said, "I hope you understand what you've done." I laughed shakily. "Not yet." She gave me that dry half smile of hers. "You will." Then came the program coordinator, then another professor, then classmates, then 2 faculty members I had only worked with once, but who still took the time to congratulate me. Over and over. I heard words I had never heard in my own home. Outstanding. Brilliant. Deserved. Exceptional. You earned this. Every single one landed somewhere tender. Not because I still needed strangers to build me from scratch, but because being seen clearly after years of distortion is its own kind of healing. Painful healing. Sometimes, the sort that stings because it reveals how long you lived without it. I was still speaking with one of my professors when I noticed my family approaching through the crowd. My mother had already arranged her face. That was the first thing I saw. Not joy, not even confusion anymore. Control. It was subtle, but I knew her too well to miss it. The lips pressed into a polite smile, the posture reset. The eyes already measuring how to step into the story now that the public facts had made resistance impossible. Caleb hung behind her, expression sour and unreadable. Aunt Renee was smiling too brightly. My mother reached me first. "Well," she said, with a small laugh that tried far too hard to sound natural. "I guess you really surprised everyone." Everyone, not me, not us. Everyone, as if she had not spent years leading the chorus. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something in me settle. This was the moment, not the award, not the applause. The moment she would try to step around her own cruelty and place herself near my achievement before the light fully set. She touched the edge of the plaque lightly. "Top graduate. That's very impressive." My aunt jumped in immediately. "I told your mother you were doing better than you let on." That was almost enough to make me laugh. The speed with which family histories rewrite themselves would be funny if it were not so insulting. Caleb shoved his hands into his pockets. "Didn't know your department gave out awards like that." Dr. Mercer, who was still standing only a few feet away, heard him. "They don't," she said coolly. The silence after that was delicious. My mother's smile tightened almost invisibly. Then she tried the move I had half expected from the moment I saw her crossing the room. "I always knew you were more capable than you thought," she said. "There are sentences that do not merely annoy you. They split open old wounds because of the audacity packed inside them. That was one of them." For 1 second, everything around me seemed to go quieter. The crowd was still moving. Families were still laughing. Cameras were still flashing. But inside me, a clear and terrible calm took over. Because no, she did not get to do that. She did not get to sit through the public outcome of my years of work and suddenly edit herself into the story as a cautious believer. She did not get to turn cruelty into tough love because the ending embarrassed her. She did not get to borrow my victory as a mirror for herself. So I said, quietly enough that only the people nearest us could hear, "No, you didn't." My mother blinked. I kept my voice level. "You told me I was too stupid for college." Her face changed. Not much, but enough. Aunt Renee looked down immediately. The way people do when they realize the version of events they were preparing to support has become inconveniently specific. My mother let out a tiny breath. "Lena, this is not—" "Yes," I said, still calm. "It is." I held the plaque a little tighter, not because I needed its weight for confidence, but because it grounded me. It reminded me I was not the girl at the dinner table anymore. I was not trapped in her version of me. I was standing in a crowded auditorium with proof in my hands and faculty at my back. "You laughed at me," I said. "In front of the family. You called me too stupid for college. You mocked my classes. You dismissed every step I took. So please do not stand here now and act like you believed in me." My mother's eyes flickered toward the people around us, already aware that this was happening too publicly for comfort. I was trying to be realistic. That word, realistic. Cruel people love that word when they want to pretend discouragement was wisdom. I looked straight at her. "No," I said. "You were trying to make sure I stayed small enough for you to feel right." The air around us went completely still. Caleb muttered, "Can we not do this here?" I turned to him without heat. "You don't get a vote?" He looked stunned, which almost would have been funny if I were not so tired of all of them. My mother swallowed. "I'm your mother, and I'm your daughter," I said. My voice never rose, but it sharpened in a way I knew she felt. That's exactly why it mattered. There were tears in my eyes again by then, but I refused to let them weaken the moment. Tears are not weakness anyway, no matter what women like my mother spend years teaching their daughters to believe. Sometimes tears are simply what happens when truth finally stops choking itself to protect other people. "You don't get credit for this," I said. "You don't get to stand next to the result of years you made harder and call yourself part of it. You didn't believe in me. You bet against me. And I still won." No one spoke. Not my mother. Not Caleb. Not my aunt. Even the noise of the crowd seemed farther away for a second, like the moment had stepped into its own clean circle. And in that silence, I saw something I had never quite seen on my mother's face before. Not rage, not superiority, not even simple embarrassment. Recognition. The sudden, sick recognition that the daughter she had spent years defining had become a woman she could no longer control through ridicule. That the old hierarchy had not just cracked in private, it had broken in public, and no amount of smoothing or smiling or revised memory was going to put it back together the same way. My mother looked at me for a long moment, then said, very quietly, "You're making me sound cruel." I held her gaze. That was it. No speech. No reconciliation. No family scene dramatic enough to satisfy the fantasy of justice. Just a simple sentence, spoken where she could not dismiss it and I did not have to soften it. And somehow, that was better. Because I was not there to perform pain for her anymore. I was there to stop carrying it alone. After that, she had nothing to say. She stepped back first. Caleb followed. My aunt muttered something about taking a picture later, but her voice sounded distant and awkward now, like she had realized she had wandered into truth without a script. They drifted away into the crowd, and I stood there in my gown, award in hand, heart still racing, but lighter. Not healed all at once, not untouched, but lighter, because for years, my mother's words had lived in me like a verdict. Too stupid for college. That day, in front of faculty, students, families, and the woman who had said it, I finally understood what they really were. Not prophecy, not truth. Just a limit she tried to place on me because she could not imagine me rising past the version of myself that made her comfortable. And the best part was this. She had to watch me do it anyway. I thought the hardest part of that day would be hearing my name called. I was wrong. The hardest part came after. When the applause faded, the photos were taken, the flowers started wilting at the edges, and I had enough quiet to feel what the moment had actually uncovered. Because winning did not just prove my mother wrong, it exposed how long she had needed me to stay wrong. That realization stayed with me all evening. After my family drifted away in that awkward, brittle cloud of silence, I spent another hour on campus taking pictures with classmates and professors. My smile was real in most of them. So was the joy. I do not want to lie about that. There was joy. There was pride. There was a deep, almost disorienting relief in finally standing inside something I had fought so hard for. But underneath all of it, there was another feeling too. something heavier and more painful than I had expected. Clarity. I had spent years thinking that if I succeeded enough, my mother would soften. If I brought home strong enough grades, worked hard enough, stayed humble enough, absorbed enough criticism without snapping, maybe one day she would look at me and finally see what other people were starting to see. Maybe she would become proud in the simple, generous way daughters hope for, even when they know better. But that day made something brutally clear. My mother had never failed to see my potential. She had feared it. That was the part I could no longer unsee. Because if she had truly believed I was incapable, my success might have surprised her into humility. It might have cracked open some sincere admission that she had misjudged me. But that was not what happened. The instant public proof arrived. She did not say, "I was wrong." She did not say, "I hurt you." She did not even say, "I'm sorry." She tried to move herself closer to the victory before anyone could fully connect her to the insult. That is not what people do when they were mistaken. That is what they do when they were threatened. By the time I got home that evening, I was exhausted down to my bones. My apartment was full of little signs of the day, flowers on the counter, my heels kicked off near the door, my cap and gown draped over the chair, the award itself sitting on the table in a patch of late sunlight like something almost unreal. I stood in the doorway for a long moment just looking at it. Top graduate in the entire program. The phrase still felt too big to belong entirely to me. Then again, maybe that was part of the damage too. Spend enough years being called small, and even your own accomplishments arrive sounding like they belong to someone braver. I changed into sweatpants, washed off my makeup, tied my hair back, and sat on the couch with the plaque in my lap. That was when I cried. Not because I regretted what I said to my mother. I didn't. Not because the day had been ruined. It hadn't. I cried because the girl in me who had wanted one real apology finally understood she was probably never getting it. There is a specific kind of grief that comes when you stop hoping the person who hurt you will become the person who heals you. It is clean grief, sharp grief, the kind that hurts so much because it makes room for peace. That night, my phone buzzed 3 times. First from my Aunt Renee, "You were amazing today. Your mother is just overwhelmed." Then from Caleb, "You didn't have to embarrass her like that." Then, 20 minutes later, from my mother, "I think we should talk when emotions settle." I stared at that message for a long time. When emotions settle, as if emotion were the problem, as if the issue had not been years of contempt, years of mockery, years of being handed a role and then punished every time I tried to step outside it. As if my calm, public refusal to let her rewrite the past had been some unfortunate flare-up instead of the most honest conversation we had ever had. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I set the phone face down and let the silence do what my family never had. Tell the truth without interruption. Over the next week, the story of graduation moved through the family faster than I expected. Relatives who had barely checked in during my studies suddenly sent messages full of exclamation points and pride they had not earned. Some of them were harmless enough. "Congratulations. We always knew you were smart. So proud of you." That last one in particular made me laugh more than once. Because no, they hadn't always known. Most of them had simply found it easier to accept my mother's version of me than to look closely enough to question it. But not everyone stayed comfortable. I heard from my cousin Marisa, who told me quietly that my mother had been very upset after the ceremony and kept insisting I had attacked her unfairly in public. According to Marisa, my aunt had tried to smooth things over by saying I had probably just been emotional after such a big moment. Emotional? There it was again. The oldest trick in the family system. When I stayed silent through cruelty, I was mature. When I told the truth about it, I was emotional. Marissa hesitated before saying the next part. For what it's worth, I don't think everyone sees it that way. That caught my attention. What do you mean? She was quiet for a second. I think some people are starting to realize your mom has talked about you like that for years. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, because that was the other thing success had exposed. Not just my mother's cruelty, but the people who had made room for it. The relatives who laughed awkwardly instead of objecting. The ones who changed the subject. The ones who heard her diminish me over and over and treated it like personality instead of harm. Family systems are rarely built by one cruel person alone. They are maintained by everyone who finds it easier not to interrupt. And now the interruption had happened publicly. People could pretend not to notice a private insult. It is harder to do that after watching the stupid daughter receive the highest honor in the room. A few days later, Dr. Mercer invited me for coffee. I almost said no because I was still socially drained, but I went, and I'm glad I did. We sat outside a small cafe near campus while the late afternoon light turned everything gold at the edges. She asked how I was feeling, and I surprised myself by telling the truth. Proud, I said, and tired, and kind of sadder than I expected. She nodded like none of that surprised her. Because it didn't fix what came before, she said. I looked down at my cup. Exactly. She was quiet for a moment, then said something I carried with me for a long time after. Recognition reveals people, she said. It doesn't change them. It reveals who encouraged you, who ignored you, who needed you smaller, and who is only comfortable with your success when they can stand near it. I let that sink in, because that was exactly what graduation had done. It had not transformed my mother into someone kinder. It had simply stripped away her ability to disguise who she had always been to me, and in a strange way, that clarity was a gift, even though it hurt. Once you see the pattern clearly, it becomes harder to crawl back into it and call it love. My mother called me 4 days after graduation. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I missed her, because I wanted to hear what version of the story she had prepared. Her voice was measured, controlled, too controlled. I think, she said, that perhaps things were said on both sides that were harsher than they needed to be. I actually smiled, though there was no humor in it. On both sides? I'm trying to move forward. Lena, no apology, no direct acknowledgement, just the familiar pressure to skip straight to peace without walking through truth first. I stared out the window for a second before answering. Moving forward without honesty is just pretending. She exhaled sharply. You always make things more dramatic than they are. That sentence should have hurt. Instead, it made me feel strangely calm, because there it was again, the instinctive need to reduce me when she could not control me. Not a misunderstanding, not a bad moment, a reflex, a worldview. A mother who had spent years protecting her authority by belittling the daughter who threatened it simply by growing. And suddenly, I was too tired to keep negotiating with that. No, I said quietly. I think I spent years making things less dramatic than they were, so everyone else could stay comfortable. She went silent. Then she tried one last time. I was hard on you because I didn't want you getting unrealistic ideas. I closed my eyes. There it was. The confession hidden inside the excuse. Not I thought you couldn't do it. I didn't want you thinking too far past the place I had assigned you. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. You weren't protecting me from disappointment. You were protecting yourself from being wrong. She hung up 2 seconds later. And that was when I knew. Not guessed. Knew. There would be no healing between us unless it happened without lies. And she was still too invested in the lies. So I made a choice I had been circling for years without naming. I stopped trying to win tenderness from someone who resented my growth. I did not make a dramatic announcement. I did not send a final, poetic text. I simply stepped back. I answered less, shared less, explained less. I stopped offering my inner life to someone who treated it like material for correction. And almost immediately, I felt the difference. It was subtle at first. A quieter nervous system. Fewer stomach knots before family calls. No need to rehearse how I would say basic facts about my life, so they sounded small enough not to trigger contempt. Then it grew into something bigger. Peace. Not the fake peace my family liked. The kind built on silence, denial, and one person swallowing the truth to keep the room calm. Real peace. The kind that arrives when you stop begging to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. Looking back, the award mattered for reasons beyond achievement. Yes, it opened doors. Yes, it changed how faculty saw me. Yes, it gave me a credential no one could take away. But emotionally, its greatest gift was not the plaque. It was exposure. It exposed that my mother's label for me had never fit. It exposed that her cruelty had not been accidental. It exposed that some people in the family had gone along with it because it kept the old order intact. And most importantly, it exposed that I no longer needed any of them to revise the truth before I could live inside it. I was not stupid. I had never been stupid. I had simply been raised by someone who needed brilliance to look like obedience, speed, and ease. Because the kind of intelligence I had, the patient kind, the relentless kind, the kind that kept building in silence, was much harder to control. And once I understood that, I stopped needing her to call me by the right name. I already knew it myself. For the first time in my life, that was enough. A month after graduation, I hung the award in my apartment, not in the bedroom, where only I would see it. Not tucked into a drawer like something too delicate or private to live in the open. I hung it in the living room, above the narrow bookshelf near the window where the late afternoon light touched it for a few minutes every day. At first, I told myself it was because that wall needed something there, because the space looked unfinished, because it made practical sense. That was not the truth. The truth was, I needed to see it. Not because I still doubted what happened on that stage, not because I needed a trophy to remind me I had value, but because after spending so many years hearing one sentence repeated in different forms, too slow, too sensitive, too unrealistic, too stupid, I wanted one visible, permanent thing in my home that answered all of it without asking permission. Top graduate in the entire program. That title did not erase the old one, but it exposed it. And once exposed, it began to lose its grip. Life moved quickly after that. There were interviews, recommendations, faculty introductions, long conversations about graduate school and opportunities I once would not have even let myself imagine out loud. The same discipline that had carried me through years of proving I belonged now had somewhere to go besides survival. I was no longer just fighting against a family story. I was building a future with real shape, real momentum, real possibility. That was its own kind of emotional adjustment. When you have spent years living in reaction to limitation, freedom can feel disorienting at first. No one prepares you for that part. They talk about success like it arrives cleanly, as if achievement is a finish line where your body finally unclenches and your mind falls silent. But mine didn't. Not right away. Even in the middle of good things, I still had moments when I braced for ridicule that never came. Moments when praise made me uncomfortable because some old reflex expected it to be followed by correction. Moments when I caught myself minimizing my own accomplishments in new rooms, almost automatically, before anyone else had the chance. Healing is strange like that. You can leave the room where the insult was spoken and still spend months teaching your nervous system that no one is about to say it again. But slowly, that changed too. I got better at saying thank you when people complimented my work, instead of immediately explaining why it was not a big deal. I got better at noticing when shame was old, not current. I got better at hearing my mother's voice in my head and recognizing it as an echo, not a fact. And because I was no longer spending all my strength surviving her version of me, I had more left for the life in front of me. That life was quieter than I once imagined success would be. Not glamorous, not cinematic, just steady. A desk with neatly stacked articles, mornings with coffee and open windows, emails from mentors, work that challenged me in the right ways, new plans forming in a mind that had once been taught to fear its own reach. The more stable my life became, the more I understood how much chaos I had once mistaken for normal. My relationship with my mother never fully repaired. I know some people expect stories like this to end with a softened parent, a tearful apology, a long-delayed confession that finally puts everything back into place. But real life is not always kind enough to give you that. Some people would rather protect the story they told about you than face what it costs to tell it. My mother stayed mostly herself. There were periods of silence, polite texts on holidays, the occasional stiff conversation that skimmed over safe topics and avoided anything real. Once, months later, she came to my apartment for the first time since graduation. She stood in the living room, noticed the award on the wall, and looked at it for a little too long. Then she said, "You always were more determined than I gave you credit for." It was the closest thing to an admission I ever got. Not enough, not clean, not an apology. But by then, I no longer needed it to be. That is what changed most after graduation. Not her, but me. Before, I had still been waiting for some final external correction, some authority figure powerful enough to overrule the one who had named me wrong first. I thought the dean's announcement might do that. I thought the applause might do that. I thought the award itself might finally drown out the old sentence. It didn't, not by itself. Because the most important thing was not that the dean called me top graduate. It was that I finally stopped calling myself what my mother had called me. That took longer. It took therapy and distance and repetition and the humiliating tenderness of learning to speak to myself like someone worth protecting. It took realizing that insults repeated in childhood do not become truth just because they arrive early. It took understanding that some parents do not define their children accurately. They define them conveniently. My mother needed me to be the limited one, the manageable one, the one whose dreams could be laughed at without consequence. If I stayed small, then she remained right. She remained central. She remained the authority on what I could and could not become. But the moment I outgrew the title she gave me, she lost more than a prediction. She lost control of the story. That was why the award mattered so much to her. Not because she valued it, because she could not absorb it into her version of me without exposing herself. Years later, I still remember the exact sound of the dean saying my name, not just because it was a proud moment, because it split time in two. Before that sound, there was the version of me still partly living under a sentence. After that sound, there was the version of me forced to confront a harder, freer truth. That I had never been what she called me, and that surviving her opinion had cost me too much already. Now, when I think about that dinner table, I do not relive it the same way. I still remember the sting. I still remember the silence around it. I still remember the awful loneliness of realizing no one there was going to defend me. But I also see something else now. I see a woman who mistook cruelty for authority, and a daughter who, even then, was already stronger than either of them knew. Because I did not become strong the day I won the award. I became strong the day I kept going after someone who should have protected my ambition tried to humiliate it out of me. The award was just public proof of what had been growing in private all along. That is the part I would tell anyone living inside a label given to them in pain. The title they hand you in cruelty is not your name. It is not prophecy. It is not destiny. It is often just the edge of their own fear, pressed onto your life and repeated until you are tired enough to believe it. And if you are lucky, if you are stubborn, disciplined, and brave in all the unglamorous ways that matter, you get to outlive it. You get to hear another title spoken over your life, one you earned, one they did not choose, one that fits. My mother said I was too stupid for college. The dean handed me the award for top graduate in the entire program. Only one of those statements survived the stage. And in the end, that was enough.